Colleton County held its surplus land auction on a folding table behind the county annex, under a canvas awning that popped and shuddered in the November wind. 7 bidders had come for other lots. None of them were there for lot 1331. The auctioneer, a thin man in a fleece vest, read the parcel description from a clipboard without looking up, his voice carrying the flat cadence of someone who had already decided the next 10 minutes of his life would be uneventful. 4.7 acres, classified unbuildable wetland, former fish hatchery, delinquent on property taxes since 1997. Minimum bid, $1. Odell Francis stood at the back of the small crowd, in a dark green wool coat, 2 sizes too large, fraying at the cuffs. The kind of coat a woman wears when she has stopped expecting anyone to look at her. She was 70 years old. In her left hand she held a burgundy leather coin purse, cracked along the clasp, and inside it were $14 and a brass thimble that had belonged to her late husband's mother. Her left ear carried a hearing aid that whistled faintly when the wind shifted direction. And the wind was shifting now, coming off the marsh to the south, carrying the smell of pluff mud and November. She raised her hand and said, $6. No one else moved. The auctioneer glanced at the clerk beside him, a woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the clerk shrugged. The auctioneer struck the table with the flat of his hand. Sold. The auction had taken 11 minutes total. Lot 1331 was the last item on the docket. The woman standing next to Odell leaned toward a friend and whispered it loud enough that the hearing aid was not required. Lord, she bought a swamp. What Odell did not know, what no one in the county knew, was that beneath 4.7 acres of black water and tupelo roots, beneath the cattails and the rot and the cottonmouth nests, something had been waiting for 11 years. Her husband had put it there, not the swamp itself, that had been there for centuries, but the proof of what the swamp was actually sitting on, and the legal right to claim it. She would find the first piece in the 3rd week, driven into the south bank inside a length of PVC pipe. She would find the last piece 7 months later, wired to the underside of a pump housing she had walked past 200 times without looking down. And when she played what was inside, she would hear a voice she had not heard in 11 years say her name. But before any of that, before the pipe, before the deed, before the tape, there was the morning she was put out on the street with her life in garbage bags. 3 weeks before the auction, on a Tuesday at 7:40 in the morning, Odell was sitting at her kitchen table on Laurel Street in Walterboro, South Carolina, drinking a cup of chicory coffee and hemming a church dress for a neighbor. She had lived in that rented house for 41 years, since 1982, the year she and Raymond moved in. The house belonged to the Keatley family. Old Mr. Keatley, the original landlord, had died 2 years prior. His grandson Darren inherited the building along with 11 other rental properties across the county. Darren was 38. He wore boat shoes without socks and spoke to Odell as though she was slightly hard of hearing in both ears, not just one. There was a knock. Odell set down the dress and opened the front door. Darren Keatley stood on the porch, with 2 men in work gloves and a sheriff's deputy leaning against a cruiser at the curb. Darren held a piece of paper. He did not hand it to her. He read from it, "Mrs. Francis, you've been given 60 days' notice as required. The 60 days were up on the 1st. I need the property vacated by noon today." Odell stood in the doorway and said quietly, "I paid October." "October doesn't cover November," Darren said. "And frankly, Mrs. Francis, the building's being converted. I've explained this." He folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "The guys will help you move your things." The guys began carrying her belongings out of the house in black garbage bags. The furniture was too large for the bags, so they set the couch on the curb and the sewing table beside it. Odell's sewing machine, a 1971 Singer Touch and Sew that Raymond had bought her for their 12th wedding anniversary, was placed on the grass next to a bag of kitchen utensils. Odell watched from the porch. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She watched the way a person watches a weather event, something too large and indifferent to argue with. Her neighbor Martha Sims stood on the sidewalk across the street with her arms folded, Martha called out, not to Odell but to Darren. "You ought to be ashamed." Darren did not respond. He checked his phone. 3 other neighbors watched from windows. No one else came outside. Odell walked to the grass, picked up the sewing machine with both hands, and carried it to her car, a 2004 Buick Century with a cracked windshield parked in the driveway. She set it on the back seat. The cruelty of the morning was not loud. Darren did not shout. He was polite in the way that politeness can be a weapon. Procedural and correct, and completely indifferent. The way a man speaks when he has decided that the person in front of him is a line item, rather than a life. Her sewing table had a drawer, and inside the drawer was a folder of Raymond's old papers. Pay stubs, a county identification badge, miscellaneous documents she had never sorted after his death 11 years earlier. She did not think to grab the folder. The men bagged it with everything else, and Odell did not realize it was missing until weeks later, when the absence of those papers felt like Raymond being erased a second time. His handwriting and his name sealed inside a plastic bag and deposited somewhere she could not reach. Day 1 after the eviction, Odell slept in the Buick in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly on Robertson Boulevard. The temperature dropped to 41 degrees after midnight. She ran the engine for heat twice during the night and watched the gas gauge sink below the quarter tank mark. She ate a sleeve of saltine crackers from her purse and drank water from a bottle she had filled at the kitchen sink before they took the kitchen away. Day 2, she drove to the County Department of Social Services. A caseworker with kind eyes and a folder already too thick told her the wait for emergency housing assistance was 14 weeks. Odell nodded, thanked the woman, and left. She bought a $1 menu sandwich at the Hardee's on Jeffries Highway and ate half, wrapping the other half in a napkin and placing it on the passenger seat for the next day. Days 3 through 6 blurred into a routine that was not a routine, but a survival pattern. She parked at different lots each night. The library, the Baptist church on Richmond Street, the Food Lion. She washed her face in gas station restrooms and dried her hands on her coat. The hearing aid battery died on day 4. She could not afford a replacement. The world on her left side went quieter, as though someone had closed a door halfway, and the sounds that remained were muffled and uncertain. Day 7. Her Social Security check was still 12 days away. She had $14 in the coin purse. Inside the coin purse, she felt the brass thimble, small and cool and heavy for its size. It had been Raymond's mother's. Odell used to wear it when she sewed wedding dresses, the metal cap on her middle finger guiding the needle through layers of satin and lace. She had not sewn a wedding dress in 6 years. She held the thimble in her palm and closed her fingers around it. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel and thought the thought she had been circling for a week, that she had outlived her usefulness, that the world had finished needing Odell Francis and simply forgotten to tell her. She had not called her daughter Cheryl in Atlanta, not because they were estranged, because Odell could not bear to ask. She had not gone to the church shelter. She had not told Martha Sims. Her pride was a wall, and it was also the thing keeping her spine straight in the parking lot of the Food Lion at dusk. Her hands steady on the wheel, her coat buttoned to the collar. The pride that isolated her was the same pride that would not let her give up. This was the contradiction at the center of her, and she did not know which side of it would win. In 43 years as a seamstress, Odell had developed an ability she never thought of as unusual, because no one had ever named it for her. She could look at any flat pattern and see the three-dimensional shape it would become. She could measure a room by eye within a quarter inch. She read space the way most people read faces, instinctively without effort, the geometry of things presenting itself to her as naturally as color. Raymond used to joke that she should have been the engineer. He told a co-worker once, with the quiet pride of a man who knew exactly who he had married, "She reads space the way I read water." Day 9. Odell was in the Walterboro Public Library, using the free computer to check her bank balance. The screen read $0 and 0 cents. The Social Security deposit had not cleared. She logged off and stood, and on the way to the exit, she passed the bulletin board near the front door. A yellow flyer, pinned at a slight angle, caught her eye. Colleton County Surplus Land Auction. November 18. All parcels, minimum bid, $1. She read the list of lots. Most were slivers of land nobody wanted. Drainage easements, landlocked triangles, a half-acre behind the water treatment plant. Then, Lot 1331. 4.7 acres. Unbuildable wetland. Former fish hatchery off Ashton Road. Ashton Road. The name moved through her like a current. Raymond used to drive out to Ashton Road on Saturday mornings in the 1980s. He would leave after breakfast and come back in the afternoon with mud on his boots and a quiet expression she never learned to read. She asked him once where he went. He said he was checking on something for work. She never asked again, because Raymond was the kind of man whose silences were not evasions, but promises, assurances that whatever he was doing had a purpose he would explain when the time came. The time never came. He had a stroke on a Tuesday morning in 2012 and died at 68, and his Saturdays on Ashton Road went with him. She stared at the flyer for a long time. She did not know what she would do with a swamp. She did not know what anyone would do with a swamp, but the address was the one Raymond used to drive to, and in the 11 years since his death, everything else of his had been taken. His clothes donated, his tools sold, his papers bagged and lost on a curb. If there was one more place where Raymond had been, she wanted to stand in it. She tore the flyer off the board. The librarian looked up. Odell folded it into her coin purse, next to the thimble. The auction was in 9 days. She had $14. She did not yet know that 6 of them would change the rest of her life. The day after the auction, November 19th, Odell drove the Buick down Ashton Road. The temperature was 38 degrees, overcast, the air carrying wood smoke and the mineral tang of tidal mud. The paved road became a dirt track after the last mailbox, and the dirt track ended at a rusted cattle gate chained to a pine post. A faded county sign bolted to the gate read, Lot 1331. No trespassing, Colleton County property. She had the deed receipt in the pocket of her wool coat. The property was hers now. She unchained the gate and drove through. The swamp opened beyond a line of loblolly pines, the trees giving way all at once like a curtain parting on a stage set for something ancient and indifferent. The ground went soft within 20 steps of the car. Black water, not deep, maybe shin-height in most places, but impenetrable in color. A surface so dark it looked solid until something moved beneath it. Tupelo trees rose out of the water, with swollen bases that looked like the ankles of old men. Spanish moss hung in grey curtains from every branch, and the air smelled of sulphur and decomposition, and beneath all of it, something mineral, almost metallic, a scent Odell could not name but that her body registered as significant. The sounds were layered. Frogs, even in November, because the low-country frogs did not follow the calendar the way northern frogs did. A woodpecker somewhere to the north, the staccato punctuation of its beak against bark, and beneath those sounds, lower and steadier, the faint gurgle of moving water. Not surface water, something underneath. Odell noticed it. She did not yet understand it. There were remnants of the old fish hatchery scattered across the parcel. A concrete sluice gate, crumbled on one side, with rebar showing through the broken edge like exposed bone. A pump housing, cast iron roughly the size of a washing machine, rusted to the color of dried blood, and bolted to a concrete pad that was half submerged in the waterline. A footbridge made of pressure-treated lumber crossed a narrow channel to a slightly higher area on the east side, where the ground was firmer, maybe a quarter acre of solid earth above the waterline. On the higher ground stood the collapsed skeleton of a small shed, its roof gone and 2 walls still standing at uncertain angles, and the remains of what might have been a dock. Now, just pilings driven into the mud, like the last teeth in an old mouth. Odell had not come alone, though she had not invited anyone. Word of the auction had spread the way it spreads in small towns, not through newspapers, but through gas stations and church parking lots and the counter at the hardware store. When she got out of the Buick, 2 pickup trucks were parked on Ashton Road 100 yards back. Men she recognized. One of them, a man named Curtis Blaine, who ran the hardware store on Hampton Street, leaned out of his window and called, "Miss Odell, you planning to build a house out there or just go fishing?" Laughter followed, carried on the cold air. She did not respond. She walked past the gate and into the trees. On the firmer ground near the collapsed shed, a grey tabby cat, with one ear missing, sat on a stump and watched Odell approach with the focused indifference of a creature that had been there first and intended to stay. The cat did not run. Odell extended her hand. It sniffed her fingers, paused, and looked away, as though whatever information it had gathered was insufficient to warrant further interest. She would later call it Bishop, because it sat with a posture of permanent disapproval, like a bishop at a poorly attended service. Odell spent the first full day walking the parcel, moving slowly through the knee-deep water and along the firmer edges, looking for nothing in particular. She was trying to understand what she had bought. The higher ground on the east side was approximately a quarter acre. The shed was unsalvageable. The footbridge was usable but listed to one side. Then there was the pump housing, cast iron, bolted to a concrete pad with 8 bolts. The bolts were rusted on the surface, but when Odell knelt and looked more closely, the way she looked at anything that seemed slightly wrong, she noticed that the rust was only surface level. The bolts themselves were stainless steel, not iron. Someone had used stainless steel bolts on a cast iron pump housing in a condemned fish hatchery. That was wrong. That was someone spending money on something that did not need it. She also noticed, but did not yet investigate, that the footbridge's crossbeams were bolted from below, not nailed from above. A small detail. She filed it the way a seamstress files a crooked seam. Automatically, without conscious thought, the irregularities stored somewhere in the back of her awareness until the pattern needed it. Walking the south bank later that afternoon, she saw a length of white PVC pipe driven vertically into the mud at the waterline. It was capped on top. It looked like a survey marker, but survey markers were typically metal or wooden stakes, not capped PVC. She almost walked past it. Then she stopped. She grabbed the pipe with both hands and worked it back and forth. The mud held it for a moment, then released it with a wet, sucking sound. The pipe was about 3 feet long. The cap was sealed with waterproof cork, applied deliberately, a bead of it running in a clean line around the circumference. She pried the cap off with a stick. Inside was a rolled sheet of heavy drafting paper, protected by a plastic sleeve. She slid it out. The paper was dry. She walked it to the footbridge and unrolled it on the planks, holding the corners down with her palms. A hand-drawn map of the parcel, detailed, contour lines, depth markings, flow arrows. Symbols she did not recognize, geological shorthand for water tables and permeability and flow rates. The map was drawn in blue ink, precise, the hand of someone trained, someone who understood that accuracy was a form of care. In the lower right corner, in handwriting she knew as well as her own face, handwriting she had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the note he left on the kitchen table the morning he had the stroke. Dell. The water is under everything. Trust the map. Trust me. RF, June 1984. Dell, his private name for her. The name nobody else used. She sat on the footbridge with the map in her lap. She had not seen Raymond's handwriting in years. She touched the ink with her fingertip, half expecting it to smudge, but it held firm, set into the fiber of the paper by decades. She sat on the bridge over the black water and held a piece of paper that proved her husband had been here, on this land 40 years ago, doing something he never told her about. And she did not know whether to feel found or lied to. She could not read the map. The geological symbols were beyond her, but she recognized that it was a map, that it was meticulous, and that Raymond had hidden it inside a sealed pipe driven into the bank of a swamp she had just bought for $6. Something was here. Something Raymond thought was important enough to protect, but not important enough, or not safe enough, to tell her about while he was alive. She made a decision. A man from a timber company had left a business card on her windshield that morning, offering $200 for the standing cypress on the parcel. $200 would buy gas, food, and a motel room for weeks. She turned it down. The map was the reason. Not because she understood it, because Raymond wrote it. She rolled the map back into its sleeve and looked out across the swamp. The water was moving. She could hear it, a low gurgle somewhere beneath the surface, the sound of something flowing that had no visible source. Raymond had drawn arrows pointing toward that sound. He had labeled it with a single word she could not read in the fading light. She would come back tomorrow with a magnifying glass. The word, when she finally read it, would change everything. But she was not ready for it yet. The next morning she returned with a magnifying glass borrowed from the Walterboro Public Library, a heavy glass lens in a tortoiseshell frame that the reference librarian handed her with a look of mild curiosity. She spread Raymond's map on the hood of the Buick. Bishop sat on the roof of the car and watched with an expression that suggested he had opinions about her methodology, but had chosen, for now, to withhold them. She held the magnifying glass over the center of the flow arrows, where Raymond had written the word she could not read the night before. The letters came into focus one by one, blue ink on heavy paper, written in the careful block print of an engineer who understood that legibility mattered. Artesian. She did not know what it meant. She drove to the library and sat down at the computer and typed the word into the search engine. An artesian aquifer, a confined underground layer of water-bearing rock under positive pressure so that water rises naturally to the surface without pumping. A natural spring system. Water that pushes itself up through the earth because the geology above it creates pressure, the way a sealed hose builds force until the end is opened. She sat back in the chair and thought about Raymond's career. He had been a hydrological engineer for the Colleton County Water Authority from 1974 until his retirement in 2001. 27 years. His job was surveying water sources, mapping them, measuring their flow, testing their chemistry. He knew where the water was. He knew where all the water was. Over the next 3 days, with the help of a reference librarian named Paul Eddings, 26 years old, with round glasses and the particular earnestness of someone who believed that every question deserved a complete answer. Odell decoded the map's additional details. The symbols and notations that had been meaningless to her on the footbridge began to resolve into a picture. The map showed the aquifer's approximate boundaries, and those boundaries extended well beyond the 4.7 acres of Lot 1331. The flow arrows indicated that the aquifer fed multiple wells to the north and east, toward the town. Small notations in Raymond's hand indicated flow rate estimates and seasonal variation. And one notation, circled twice in blue ink, read, Pre-1895 flow, senior rights applicable. Paul Eddings explained what that meant. Senior water rights in South Carolina's riparian system meant that the oldest documented use of a water source took legal priority over all newer claims. If Raymond could prove the spring predated the county's own wells, the water rights would be extraordinary. They would be older than the county's water system itself. Odell did not understand the full legal implications yet, but she understood the scale of what Raymond had been doing. This was not a weekend hobby. This was years of meticulous, professional-grade surveying, done in secret on a parcel he did not own, and hidden inside a sealed pipe. The question pressed against her like a hand on her chest. Why did he hide it? Who was he hiding it from? She decided to walk the parcel systematically, the way she approached a complex sewing pattern, grid by grid, marking what she had covered with strips of torn cloth tied to branches. The seamstress skill emerged without announcement. She divided the acreage into sections, estimated their dimensions by eye, and moved through each one with the focused patience of a woman who had spent 4 decades making sure seams ran straight. 9 days after the auction, she was walking the grid near the pump housing. The map showed a small X at a spot 6 feet east of the housing, a mark she had initially dismissed as a drafting error. She probed the ground with a stick and hit something solid about 18 inches down. A hollow sound, plastic on wood. She knelt and dug with her hands and a flat rock, the cold clay packing under her fingernails, until she uncovered a plastic cooler, the kind used for fishing, buried in the earth with its lid sealed shut by duct tape layered thick. She pried the lid open with the rock. Inside were 12 glass tubes, each about 8 inches long, sealed with rubber stoppers. Each tube contained a cylinder of compacted earth and sediment, core samples, each one labeled with a date and a depth in Raymond's handwriting. March 1982, 14 feet. August 1983, 22 feet. January 1985, 31 feet. October 1986, 38 feet. The dates spanned 4 years. The depths went progressively deeper, as though Raymond had been drilling down through the layers of the earth, the way a person drills down through a question, going further each time, refusing to stop until he hit the answer. Taped to the inside lid of the cooler was a note, written on an index card in blue ink. I took these samples over 4 years. Each one proves what the county does not want to know. This spring has been flowing since before the revolution. What the county does not want to know. The phrase opened a new dimension. Raymond had not been merely studying the aquifer. He had been building a case, and he had believed the county was opposed to it. This was adversarial. This was a secret kept not just from Odell, but from his own employer. She picked up the October 1986 tube and turned it in her hands. On the label, beneath the date and the depth, Raymond had written a margin note in smaller handwriting, almost an afterthought, the kind of thing a person writes when they are alone and speaking to someone who is not there. Odell will understand. She has always understood water better than I have. She just doesn't know it yet. She held the glass tube up to the November light. The sediment layers were visible through the glass, dark clay giving way to grey sand, then a thin line of white calcium, and below that, a wet, glittering layer that caught the sun and threw it back in tiny sparks. The aquifer material. She turned the tube slowly, watching the light move through it. Bishop jumped onto the cooler lid and sniffed the label with the focused attention of a creature inspecting evidence. Odell went to the county records office and looked up Raymond's name in connection with Lot 1331. She found nothing. His name was not associated with the parcel in any public record. The parcel had been county-owned since 1970, seized for unpaid taxes from a family named Gaillard, who had used it as a rice paddy in the 1940s. Raymond's work here had been unofficial, off the books. A county employee, secretly surveying county land, hiding his findings in sealed containers and buried coolers. The question of why grew heavier. 3 weeks after the auction, December arrived. The weather turned cold. Frost coated the Tupelo trunks in the mornings, and the black water developed a thin skin of ice at the edges that broke under Odell's boots like glass. She had been coming to the swamp every day. She had cleared the higher ground, patched the shed enough to store her tools, a shovel, a rake, a tarp, all bought at a yard sale for $7 after her Social Security check finally arrived. She slept in the Buick, parked inside the cattle gate now, her and Bishop sharing the back seat. The cat curled against her hip, with the particular warmth of a creature that has decided, without sentiment, that cooperation is efficient. She returned to the footbridge. Raymond's map showed a symbol at the footbridge she had initially read as a structural notation, a mark indicating a support beam or a load point. But looking at it again with the magnifying glass, tracing the lines the way she traced a pattern, she realized it was not a structural notation. It was an arrow pointing down. Under the bridge, she lay on the bridge planks and looked at the underside. The crossbeams were bolted, not nailed. She had noticed that on day 1. Now she saw why. One crossbeam was bolted with 4 bolts instead of 2. The extra 2 bolts held a steel ammunition box, military surplus, olive drab green, about 12 inches long, flat against the underside of the beam. Invisible, unless you were lying on your stomach with your arms hanging over the edge and looking up at exactly the right angle. The seamstress in her had seen the uneven bolting weeks ago and filed it away. Now the pattern completed itself. It took her 30 minutes to unbolt the box, lying on the bridge with her arms hanging over the edge into the cold water. Using a borrowed wrench, the bolts were stainless steel, the same as the pump housing, Raymond's signature material. The ammunition box was sealed with a rubber gasket. She pried it open on the bridge. Inside was a single legal-sized envelope, dry and crisp, as though it had been filed in a cabinet rather than bolted to the underside of a bridge over a swamp for 37 years. Inside the envelope was a notarized document dated September 12, 1986, stamped by the Colleton County Clerk of Court. The document was titled Declaration of Pre-Existing Water Rights, the Francis Family Water Trust. The deed established that the natural artesian spring on lot 1331 constituted a pre-existing water source, with continuous flow documented prior to 1895, and that the riparian rights to this water source were held in perpetuity by the Francis Family Water Trust, trustee, Odell Marie Francis. Beneath the deed, folded separately, was a note in Raymond's handwriting. This deed is in your name. I filed it before the county changed the rules. They cannot take it. Read every word. And rubber-banded to the outside of the ammunition box, a small card, the kind that comes with a bouquet of flowers, with a single sentence. I am sorry this is a scavenger hunt instead of a conversation. I ran out of time before I ran out of things to tell you. Odell sat on the footbridge and cried for the first time since the eviction. Not from sadness, though sadness was there, braided into every other thing she felt. She cried from the weight of understanding. Raymond had done this for her. He had spent years, secretly, on land he did not own, building a legal fortress around a water source and putting her name on it. He had surveyed and sampled and filed and cashed and sealed and bolted. And then he had died of a stroke on a Tuesday morning in 2012, without ever telling her any of it. She made two decisions. First, she decided to find a lawyer, overcoming her pride for the first time, asking for help. Paul Eddings, the librarian, referred her to a legal aid attorney named Grace Young. Second, she decided not to tell anyone else what she had found. Not yet. Not until she understood all of it. She had found the map, the samples, and the deed. But there was one more thing Raymond had left behind, something she had walked past every day for a month. It was wired to the underside of the pump housing, and she would not find it until the day someone tried to take the swamp away. That day was coming. It was already in motion. Darren Keatley had heard about the old woman living in the swamp, and he had a development plan that required exactly one thing: water. Odell spent a month in that swamp following a dead man's map, and she was not done yet. If this story has you watching the way she read that map, slowly, piece by piece, trusting the hand that drew it, then take a second and subscribe. There is one more thing hidden at that swamp, and when Odell finds it, you are going to hear Raymond's voice. Darren Keatley's interest in Lot 1331 had nothing to do with the swamp and everything to do with what sat beside it. He owned 12 acres of dry, buildable land on the east side of Ashton Road, adjacent to the parcel, and for 2 years he had been planning a 32-unit condominium development on that land. The plans were drawn. The financing was in place. The permits were in process. The critical bottleneck was water. The county water main did not extend to that stretch of Ashton Road, and running a new main from the nearest connection point would cost an estimated $340,000, more than his financing could absorb. But a natural water source with existing rights adjacent to his parcel would solve the problem entirely. He had not bid on lot 1331 at the auction, because he did not know about the aquifer. Nobody did, except Raymond. And Raymond was dead. But now Darren had heard, from Curtis Blaine at the gas station, that the old woman who bought the swamp had been digging things up. Curtis had seen Odell carrying the cooler to her car. He mentioned it over a cup of coffee. She's out there every day digging like she lost something. Darren pulled the county records on lot 1331. He found the parcel history, the Gaillard family, the tax seizure, the surplus classification. And he found something else, a filing from 1986 that no one had looked at in decades. The Francis Family Water Trust. Water rights. On the parcel the old woman had just bought for $6. Darren did not see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a businessman solving a logistical problem. The old woman was an obstacle, not a person. He needed either to purchase the water rights or to have the county condemn the parcel and reclassify the water as a public resource, which would allow him to tap it for his development. He contacted County Commissioner Louis Purcell. Purcell was 61, a third-generation low-country politician who had sat on the county council for 22 years, and understood that the most effective political currency was infrastructure. The county water system had been strained for a decade. A new aquifer source would be a political win, the kind of announcement that got a man re-elected. Darren offered Purcell a deal. Support the condemnation of Lot 1331, and the development would include a public water tap that Purcell could announce as a county infrastructure improvement. Purcell agreed. In February, Odell received a certified letter from the Colleton County Attorney's Office. She opened it at the library, sitting across from Paul Eddings, who watched her face as she read. The letter stated that the county was initiating a review of the surplus land sale of Lot 1331, on the grounds that the parcel may have been erroneously classified as surplus, and that the sale may be voidable due to material misrepresentation of the parcel's characteristics. The county was arguing that the parcel had been sold as unbuildable wetland, but actually contained a significant water resource that was not disclosed in the sale listing. Therefore, the county claimed the sale price did not reflect the parcel's true value, and the county had the right to void the sale and reclassify the land. There was a second prong. A separate filing challenged the validity of the Francis Family Water Trust itself. The argument: Raymond Francis had been a county employee at the time he filed the trust. Any work he performed related to county water resources had been done in his capacity as a public servant, and any findings or rights derived from that work belonged to the county, not to a private individual. Grace Yoon met with Odell at the library the following day. Yoon was 34, precise, direct, the kind of attorney who did not waste words or time. She explained the situation in terms Odell could hold on to. The county had a weak case on the sale, because surplus land sales were explicitly as is, and the county had had 30 years to survey the parcel and had chosen not to. But the employee work product argument was more dangerous. If the county could prove Raymond's survey of Lot 1331 had been performed using county equipment, on county time, the trust filing could be invalidated. The stakes were plain. If the county won, Odell lost the water rights. Without the water rights, the parcel reverted to being exactly what everyone believed it was, a worthless swamp. The county set a hearing date, April 14th. Odell had 71 days. The case required an independent hydrological survey to prove the aquifer's existence and the spring's pre-1895 flow. That survey cost an estimated $4,500. Odell had $211 in her bank account. Yoon suggested a fundraising campaign online. Odell refused. "I am not putting my name on the internet asking for money." Yoon suggested contacting Cheryl in Atlanta. Odell refused again. "Cheryl has her own life. I will not be a burden." The pride that had kept her from the shelter, the pride that had kept her spine straight in the parking lot of the Food Lion, was now threatening to cost her the water rights. And Odell would not bend it. But the town was beginning to shift, slowly, the way a current changes direction before the surface shows it. Martha Sims brought Odell a thermos of coffee at the swamp one morning, standing at the cattle gate in her church shoes, and saying simply, "I brought you something warm." Paul Eddings, on his own time, began pulling every public record he could find on Raymond's employment history, filing requests and photocopying documents with the quiet diligence of a man who had decided that this story mattered. And a retired county clerk named Horace Bell, 83 years old, who remembered Raymond from the Water Authority office, told Eddings privately over the phone. Raymond Francis never used county equipment on that land. He bought his own drill rig. I saw it in his truck. March, 6 weeks before the hearing. Odell was exhausted. She had been living in the Buick for 4 months. The South Carolina spring was arriving. The swamp waking up around her, the cottonmouths moving through the warming water, the mosquitoes starting their nightly assault. She had lost 11 pounds. Her coat, already 2 sizes too large, hung from her shoulders like a curtain. Bishop slept on the dashboard and watched the sunrise through the cracked windshield. Grace Yoon delivered the bad news at the library. Without the independent survey, the case was a coin flip. The county attorney was good. Commissioner Purcell had allocated $15,000 in county legal funds to the challenge. Darren Keatley had hired a private surveyor to produce a counter-report arguing the aquifer was a county resource. Odell was outgunned, outspent, and running out of time. She went to the swamp that evening and sat on the footbridge, alone. For the second time in 5 months, she considered whether the world was telling her to stop. The first time, on the curb on Laurel Street, she had listened. This time she looked down at the water moving beneath the bridge, and heard it the way Raymond must have heard it. Constant, patient, flowing in the dark whether anyone was listening or not. 2 things converged in the same week, and together they turned the current. Paul Eddings tracked down Horace Bell's employment records from the County Human Resources Archive. The records confirmed that Bell had worked as a clerk in the Colleton County Water Authority from 1975 to 1998. Bell agreed to sign a sworn affidavit stating that Raymond Francis had purchased his own survey equipment and performed the Lot 1331 work exclusively on weekends and vacation days, not on county time. This directly undermined the employee work product argument. Bell signed the affidavit in his kitchen, sitting at a table covered with a plastic cloth, and when he set the pen down, he said, "Raymond was the most careful man I ever met. If he filed that trust, he filed it right." The day after Bell's affidavit, Odell was at the swamp, sitting near the pump housing, rereading Raymond's map for the 100th time. She noticed something she had missed before, a tiny arrow on the map pointing to the pump housing, with a notation she had previously read as a technical measurement. But with the magnifying glass, she saw it was not a measurement. It was a single word: listen. She knelt beside the pump housing. She ran her hands along the cast-iron base, her fingers moving the way they moved along a seam, reading the surface for irregularities. And she found one, a line of sealant along the bottom edge that was too straight, too deliberate, to be factory work. She lay on the ground and looked underneath the housing. Wired to the underside, in a waterproof Ziploc bag, sealed inside a second bag, was a cassette tape, and a small, battery-operated tape player. She held them in both hands. Bishop jumped off the pump housing and sat beside her in the mud. She had found the map, the samples, and the deed. Now she held the last thing, the thing that was different from the others, because it was not paper or glass or metal. It was his voice. She decided she would play the tape at the hearing. Grace Young agreed that the tape, combined with Bell's affidavit and the physical evidence, would constitute a compelling case. But Odell also decided something else. She would play the tape for herself first, alone at the swamp. She needed to hear what Raymond had to say before anyone else did. The hearing was in 11 days. The tape player's batteries were dead. She drove to the Dollar General on Jeffries Highway and bought a 4-pack of AA batteries for $3.29. It was the most important purchase of her life. April 3rd, 11 days before the hearing. Evening. Odell sat on the footbridge with the tape player in her lap. The swamp was in full spring transition, the peepers singing in overlapping waves. The water warmer now, the tupelo buds cracking open at the tips of every branch. Bishop lay across her feet. She loaded the batteries into the player, inserted the tape, and pressed play. Raymond's voice came through with the slight static of a cheap recorder. He cleared his throat. There was the sound of water in the background. The spring, the same gurgle she could hear now, recorded decades ago and playing back to her on a footbridge over the same water. If you're hearing this, then you found the box, and the box led you here. That means you didn't sell. That means you're still the woman I married. Odell sits very still. She has not heard this voice in 11 years. It is younger on the tape than she remembers. He must have recorded it in the late 1980s, when he was in his mid-40s. He sounds like the man who bought her the Singer sewing machine. The aquifer under this land feeds half the county's wells, and the rights belong to you. Not to the county, not to any developer. To you, I made sure, he explained. Not the narrator's summary, but Raymond's own words, recorded on a tape in a waterproof bag under a pump housing in a swamp. Spoken to a woman he was not certain would ever hear them. He had discovered the aquifer in 1981 during a routine county survey. He realized 2 things. First, the spring predated any county infrastructure. It had been flowing for centuries, used by the Gaillard family for rice cultivation. and before that, by the indigenous population of the Low Country. Second, the county had never documented it. If a private citizen established pre-existing use rights before the county claimed the source, those rights would be virtually unassailable under South Carolina riparian law. He spent 5 years gathering the evidence, the core samples, the flow measurements, the historical records, and in 1986 he filed the trust. He put it in Odell's name because he wanted it to be hers. Not his, hers. He hid the evidence at the site because he feared the county would search his home or his office if they learned what he had found. He intended to tell her when he retired. Then he retired in 2001, and his health began to decline. Then the stroke. I wanted to hand you this with a glass of sweet tea on the porch and watch your face. I wanted to say, Dele, we are not poor. We have never been poor. But a man doesn't always get to choose his timing. The tape played on, Raymond's voice steady and warm, the voice of a man who had spent years preparing for a conversation he would never get to have. And then he said the last thing. Do something good with the water. That is all I ask. The land found you the way it found me. Patient and quiet and ready. The tape clicked off. The spring gurgled. The peepers sang. Bishop shifted on Odell's feet. She sat on the bridge for a long time after the tape ended, holding the player in both hands like something fragile, like something alive. The last time she heard his voice, he had been asking her to bring him a glass of water. She brought it, and by the time she came back, he was gone. Now he was asking her one more time. Not for water, for what to do with it. April 14th. Colleton County Courthouse, Courtroom B. Odell sat at the defense table beside Grace Young. Paul Eddings was in the gallery, along with Martha Sims, who had put on her Sunday hat for the occasion. Horace Bell sat in the front row with a cane between his knees, and the straight-backed patience of a man who had waited a long time to say what he knew. On the other side of the room, the county attorney arranged his papers. Commissioner Purcell sat behind him, hands folded. Darren Keatley sat in the second row, not a party to the action but visibly invested, his eyes moving between the judge's bench and Odell's face. The county's case was competent and professional. The attorney presented the employee work product argument and the sale avoidance claim. He introduced Darren's private surveyor's report. He was not a villain, he was a man doing his job. Grace Yoon presented the defense in order. First, Horace Bell's sworn affidavit, establishing that Raymond had used his own equipment on his own time. Second, the core samples dated across 4 years of weekends, not county work hours. Third, the 1986 trust filing, notarized and recorded by the county clerk's own office 37 years earlier. The county had had 37 years to challenge it, and never had. And then Odell asked to play the tape. Yun hesitated. It was unorthodox, but the hearing officer, a woman named Judge Catherine Rowe, considered the request for a moment, and then nodded. Odell placed the tape player on the table and pressed play. Raymond's voice filled the courtroom. The same words, the same water sounds in the background. The aquifer under this land feeds half the county's wells, and the rights belong to you. The room went quiet. Not dramatic gasps, not whispered reactions, but genuine quiet, the kind that falls over a room when something true enters it. Commissioner Purcell looked at his hands. Darren Keatley stared at the table. Judge Rowe listened to the entire tape without interruption, her pen resting on her notepad, motionless. The ruling came a week later, delivered in writing. The sale was valid. Surplus land sales were as is. The Francis Family Water Trust was valid. Raymond Francis had performed the work as a private citizen. The county's challenge was denied. In June, as part of the ruling's aftermath, the State Water Resources Authority conducted an independent assessment of the aquifer beneath Lot 1331. Their report, bound in a blue cover with the state seal on the front, ran 43 pages. On page 4, between a flow rate chart and a geological cross-section, the appraisers stated the value of the water rights held by the Francis Family Water Trust, $2.3 million. The wetland itself, if enrolled in the state's carbon credit program, would generate approximately $185,000 per year. The parcel's ecological designation would make it permanently protected. Odell read the report at the library, sitting in the same chair where she had found the auction flyer 7 months earlier. She set the report down and looked out the window at the parking lot where she had once slept in her car with the same coin purse that held $14 in November. She did not say anything. She pressed her thumb against the brass thimble in her pocket and held it there until the metal was warm. Darren Keatley's condominium development stalled. Without water access, the financing collapsed. The adjacent 12 acres sat empty, the graded dirt slowly reclaiming its weeds. He did not lose everything. He still had his rental properties, but the deal that was going to be his legacy became a vacant lot with a faded sign. He drove past lot 1331 every week for the rest of that year. The swamp looked the same as it always had. He never stopped. Odell went back to the swamp the evening after she read the stake report. She sat on the footbridge with Raymond's map in her lap, the same map she had unrolled here 7 months ago. She traced the flow arrows with her finger, the way she used to trace pattern lines on fabric, following the direction of the water with the instinct of a woman who had spent her life understanding how flat things become real things. She saw it now the way Raymond saw it, not as a swamp, not as a wasteland, but as a living system, an underground river surfacing through the mud and the roots, feeding everything around it without being seen. She had spent the winter in a car, following a dead man's map through a swamp that smelled like sulfur and rot, and she had found what he left for her. Not a gift, exactly, but a proof. A proof that he had seen her clearly, that he had trusted her to find it, and that the things she believed about herself in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot in November had been wrong. She had not outlived anything. She had arrived. She took off her shoes and stood in the water at the edge of the bridge. The water was warm from the spring, warmer than the April air, and she felt the current moving over her feet, steady and constant. The same current that had been flowing since before anyone built a county, or drew a property line, or put a chain on a gate. Raymond knew it was there. He knew she would stand in it. Bishop sat on the bridge and watched her with his one-eared, disapproving stare. The cat looked at her as though she had taken an unreasonable amount of time to figure out something he had known since November. In the first year after the ruling, Odell did not sell the water rights. She leased a portion of the aquifer access to the county, on her terms, at a rate determined by the state assessment. The lease generated $138,000 per year. The county got its water. Odell retained ownership. She enrolled the 4.7-acre wetland in the South Carolina Wetland Carbon Credit Program, and the restored swamp began generating ecological credits that funded the Francis Family Water Trust. She hired a local contractor named Della Robeson, a woman who had once worked as a plumber and lost her license after a bankruptcy, to repair the shed and build a small elevated cabin on the higher ground. Odell moved out of the Buick. She slept in a bed for the first time in 6 months, and Bishop slept at the foot of it, claiming the corner as though he had been waiting for her to come to her senses. In the second year, she established the Raymond Francis Community Water Trust, a non-profit that provided free well water testing and water access grants to low-income families in Colleton County. The trust was funded by the carbon credit income. She partnered with the Low Country Land Trust to designate the swamp as the Raymond Francis Wetland Sanctuary, a migratory bird habitat and environmental education site. The collapsed fish hatchery structures were preserved as historical artifacts. The concrete sluice gate and the cast-iron pump housing and the footbridge where everything had been found. She built a small classroom on the higher ground, a single room with a tin roof and screened windows that caught the cross breeze from the marsh. Paul Eddings, now a graduate student in environmental science, funded by a scholarship Odell established, taught free Saturday workshops on water ecology. Children sat on folding chairs and learned about aquifers and wetlands, and the migratory patterns of the birds that were returning to the sanctuary in increasing numbers. Great blue herons and wood storks and painted buntings that moved through the Tupelo canopy like fragments of stained glass. She brought Cheryl down from Atlanta for a weekend. Cheryl walked the swamp with her mother, stepping carefully on the footbridge, looking at the map pinned to the classroom wall. She read the inscription in the lower right corner. Dele, The water is under everything. She looked at her mother and said, "Daddy always said you were the engineer." Odell smiled and said nothing. Curtis Blaine, the hardware store man who had laughed from his pickup truck on the first day, showed up to one of the Saturday workshops. He did not apologize. He sat in the back row and listened. The next week he brought his granddaughter, a quiet girl with braids who asked Paul Eddings how deep the aquifer was, and Paul told her, and her eyes went wide. Martha Sims became a regular volunteer, arriving early on Saturdays to set up chairs and make coffee. Horace Bell, 84 now, sat on the footbridge with his cane across his knees and told children about what the low country used to look like before the ditches and the drains and the concrete, when the water moved where it wanted and the land knew how to hold it. The mockery did not transform into adulation. That would have been too neat. It transformed into quiet presence. People came. They listened to the water. They stopped laughing. Odell retrieved the Singer Touch and Sew from the storage unit where the eviction company had deposited her belongings. The retrieval fee was $47. She set the machine up in the cabin on a table Della Robeson built from reclaimed cypress. She began sewing again. Not wedding dresses, but quilts, each one incorporating a piece of fabric cut from the waterproof bags that had held Raymond's hidden documents. She gave the quilts to families who received water access grants. Each quilt had a small tag stitched into the corner, in Odell's careful hand, from the Francis Family Water Trust. The water is under everything. November again. 2 years after the auction, Odell was 72. She stood at the south bank of the swamp, at the exact spot where the PVC pipe had been driven into the mud, the spot where she had pulled a dead man's map out of the earth and unrolled it on a listing footbridge, and seen her husband's handwriting for the first time in years. The hole was still there, a small depression in the clay, filled now with rainwater, and edged with new growth, fiddlehead ferns unfurling in the November cool. In her hand was the brass thimble, Raymond's mother's thimble, the one that had lived in the coin purse with the $14, the one she had held in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot, and in the Buick, and on the footbridge, a small piece of metal that carried the weight of every woman in the Francis family who had ever made something with her hands. She turned it over in her fingers. It was warm from her palm. She did not put it back in the coin purse. She placed it on the concrete pad of the pump housing, the housing where the tape had been hidden, and left it there. A gift returned to the place where the gifts were kept. Bishop appeared from the cattails and sat beside the thimble. He sniffed it once, considered it, and then settled into his usual posture of episcopal disdain. Odell walked to the pump housing one final time and knelt to look underneath, at the spot where the tape had been wired. The wire was still there, and the bracket Raymond had made to hold the waterproof bag, and scratched into the underside of the cast iron, in letters so small she needed the magnifying glass to read them. An inscription she had never seen before. RF plus OF, 1959. Still, their wedding year. And one word, still, meaning everything. Still here, still true, still flowing. The spring beneath Lot, 1331, flows at a rate of 600 gallons per minute. It has been flowing for longer than the county, longer than the colony, longer than anyone's record of it. It does not stop in winter. It does not stop in drought. It moves under the dark water and the Tupelo roots, and the mud, patient and constant and unseen, the way some things are, the way some people are, the way Raymond Francis loved his wife. Odell walked back to the cabin in the late November light, Bishop trotting behind her, the swamp settling into dusk, the sound of the spring the only thing moving.